Hello, everyone, and welcome to RBCM at Home. My name is Kim Goff, and I'm a program developer at the Royal BC Museum. I'm coming to you today from my office at the Royal BC Museum, which is located on the territories of the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations, the Lekwungen-speaking people in Victoria, British Columbia. This series started while we were asked to work from home, and I've had the pleasure of speaking with my colleagues in different departments about their work. Today, we're talking with archival conservator Lauren Buttle. Lauren has a specialization in the treatment of paper objects. Before coming to the Royal BC Museum in 2017, she held contract and internship positions at the Art Gallery of Ontario, the Yukon Archives, as well as the British Museum. Lauren, it's nice to see that you're back at work. And they're back, well, you've been working probably all the time from your home and doing the projects that you could, but Lauren's in her office here, so that's really nice to have her joining us. I know that while I've been at home, and probably some other people as well, I've been catching up on some projects that have been on my to-do list for a while. And one of those projects has been to organize some of my photos. But that's a really big job. And before I spend too much more time messing with it, I want to make sure I'm doing it right. And so Lauren's going to help today, giving us some tips and ideas so that if we are putting together photo albums, or if we have treasured family photo albums in our possession, that we're going to take care of them well. So thank you for that, Lauren.
Thank you, Kim. Actually, I decided on the topic of today's talk because I had actually received a few emails from the public wondering the same sorts of things. So I thought, clearly, you're not alone, Kim, in undertaking those projects during COVID. So hopefully I can help you guys out a little bit. We are a resource here at the Provincial Museum, so if you have questions afterwards, I understand Chris is on Facebook and Kim and Liz are monitoring the chat here, so please feel free to ask. And of course, on the website is you can find my name and email address, and you can always contact me later on with questions in that way as well. But luckily, being able to be on site here gives me the option of being able to lead you through some of the collection. So you can see how we store things here at the archives and how we recommend handling them here at the archives, but also I'll try to make reference to things you can do a little bit more easily at home as well. So I thought we would start by looking at a vast array of photo albums, kind of starting from the beginning of when they're becoming popular, right up to the present, because of course a photo album is a lot of things. It's a lot of things coming together to make one entity. It's a complex object that I think is more than just some of its parts. And that object changes in terms of shape and form over the years. So there's a lot of different things to consider. So I've got a selection of things to show you here, and the selection was made with great help from the collection managers here, Leslie Golding and Katie. So thank you to Ben and Leslie for their help in creating this top two. The first album is probably my favorite one to show you. It is a carte de visite album from the 19th century. And in the 19th century, you have a resurgence of kind of medieval style decoration. So you've got really elaborate covers that are quite three-dimensional. Tend to be quite thick, and in this example we've got some really nice, don't know if you can see it on the screen, but some really nice embossing and gold tooling on the edges. So with an album like this, I'm going to tilt my camera a little bit so you can see. I've got a nice foamy surface here because, as I said, we've got a lot of three-dimensionality to these albums. So resting them on a surface that is soft means that any of the protruding parts won't get worn down by being moved around on a hard surface. So that's the first thing I would recommend is have a nice soft surface to open them up on. And you also notice that I put this down spine first. A lot of people, when they're moving books, and that's, sit down because I just hit my head. When you're moving books, then that I think a lot of people tend to pack them up with the spine facing up, and that makes sense. You can see what's in the box. But it's actually safer for all bindings to rest with everything moving towards the spine. The spine is where everything's held together. So when it's the opposite way around, everything is pulling away from where it's supposed to be together. So we'll start by consulting on the spine down and just gently opening up from there. Now, as I said, the covers are quite three-dimensional, so they don't want to sit completely flat. So I'm also just going to grab a little padding here and put it down there. And that's how I would encourage you to consult our albums here at the BC Archives in the reference room. And if you can create a situation like this at home for really fragile and older albums, that's definitely advantageous. So the first kinds of albums, as you can probably see, are more rigid. Your pages are cardstock as opposed to paper, so they don't flop open in quite the same way. And that is because your photos are also much more rigid. So this, as I said, is a carte de visite album. So to understand the album, we'll look at what goes in it. So this is an example of a carte de visite. The carte de visite refers mostly to the size, and this is quite a small, the smaller of the standard size albumen prints that you get. So in the late 19th century, the most popular form of photograph was the albumen print, and this is an example here. So albumen is a type of photograph that's made on paper, a thin layer of paper, and then the image itself is created in a layer of albumen, and albumen means egg white. So for anybody that's done a lot of cooking or baking with eggs, you might notice if you got a little bit of egg white splashed on your hand and you kind of let it dry there. As it dries, it contracts and it's quite strong. It pulls on your skin quite a bit, right? The same principle happens with albumen photographs. So if you leave an albumen photograph after it's been printed and submitted through an aqueous washing process, and as part of developing the image, it will immediately want to curl up, and it will want to curl up really tightly, and it can be quite fragile, especially if it's left over time to curl up really tightly. And obviously, you can't really do it if it's curled up. So these images were frequently laminated onto more rigid cardstock to make them practical for use. So these carte de visites were normally portraits, and they would be slipped into these types of albums. In this particular example, you've got like openings in standard sizes that match up with the cards, so that you could slip the images in. Most of the time, each page has a little slit mark, either right above or right below, where you can slide everything in. This album doesn't, actually, so I am a little bit confused as to how people got these images in. There definitely are always differences and mysteries of these objects. But generally, how these are constructed is, as I said, because the photographs themselves are quite thick, the openings here are left blank in the cardstock. So the page is like a frame, and then over top of it, you get this paper frame adhered over top that holds the photograph in place. So a really common aspect of damage is that this very thin paper that's kind of holding all of each individual page together starts to rip and tear, and the images start to fall out. Luckily, in this case, we've got a really good intact example. It tends to be made worse by some different types of photographs. So other rigid photographs that were often in these types of albums. This is an example of a tintype. So it's a photograph that's printed on a really thin sheet of iron. It's not actually tin. So the metal tends to be a little bit sharper in the corners, and especially if it starts to move or bend or anything, it can sometimes cut into the paper and lose the pages. So if that happens, I think you're going to find that my advice for a lot of photo albums comes down to this, things of that nature that involve, here's a really good example of a photograph kind of sliding a little bit out of its frame. So I guess the way that they got these photos in there is just simply by sliding them around into the frame, and did so with quite a lot of care. When the pages start to break out, you have two options, and one I would say is to consult a conservator to be able to properly and fully fix the problem for you. And the other solution is that you are careful to maintain the original order. You're careful when you're handling it, and just to leave it. Doing nothing is a choice. It's an option, and it's often a very valid option. A lot of my time is spent treating objects that have been previously treated or fixed at home, sort of thing, often with tape, and undoing tape takes up a good chunk of my day sometimes. The problem with tape is that it's just not a very chemically stable material. So while it's applied, I know with the best of intentions, it often ends up causing more problems than solving them. So doing nothing and just practicing really good care and handling is a very valid option.
Lauren, I know in a photo album from home that was my mom's, the album was, the pictures are in with tape, cellophane tape, but the tape has gone yellow and is so brittle, it's kind of fallen off itself.
Yes, that's usually what happens with tape. It goes one of two ways. It either dries out and just flicks right off and fails. And that's the preferable route actually, because the other route is that it becomes really oozy, really greasy, oily, tacky. It sticks to everything, or it cross-links and it cannot be removed at all. So the fact that it's drying out and failing, that's not the worst of things. But yes, you can see what I mean by that then, that it becomes yellow, and removing that stain is not always something that we can do, at least not fully. So avoiding tape. I actually, one of my colleagues at the museum got me a button that I think sums it all up. Tape is evil. Don't use tape. I have another albumin photographic album for you. So during the late 19th century, amateur photography is definitely becoming more and more of a thing, but we are a long ways away from the point and shoot kind of photography style that we know of. So you're still commissioning photographs. In the carte de visite, these were usually studio portraits. The other side of that is professionally taken landscapes. So if you were to visit Victoria when you were traveling North America and you wanted to take a souvenir away from you, you would probably buy a picture of the place that you had gone to from a local photographic studio. So we have a large collection of such albums from Frederick Dahle. As you can see, this album is not in the best of shape because I can lift the cover right up and show you. But this is actually quite a very common form of damage in pretty much all 19th century binding styles, not even just unique to photographic albums. But again, you've got these very thick carved covers, and normally they would be attached in what's called a case binding. So all of the pages are attached to each other and sewn or glued together that way. And then the back cover, front cover, and spine just come down and get glued to the whole package, which means these big heavy covers are attached to the rest of the album with a thin layer of what is by then probably fairly low quality leather and a few sheets of not so great quality paper. So it's only natural that eventually over time the whole cover is going to pop right off. And I brought this example out just to show you that when things are broken, it sometimes makes handling them a little bit easier in the sense that we don't have to worry about moving a spine and being gentle on it, because there is no spine. So just flipping one page over at a time does make handling a little bit easier. Of course, it does mean that things can shift around, and shifting around might chip away at edges, you might lose pieces, and also your pages might get out of order. So, next example here. Often what we do in situations like that is to create a 4-flap folder. So this just holds everything in nice and tight, so that there's not a lot of shifting that can happen, and so nothing's falling out of order. We also often, if there aren't page numbers, we might add very gently, and not to the photograph itself, but to the paper pages. We might add in light pencil page numbers just to make sure that we maintain the original order if that's important. So, we'll move on to our next example.
And people can see more Frederick Dahle photographs on the Learning Portal at the Royal BC Museum. I'll pop a link in here. But a very prolific photographer in Victoria's early days, so you can see some of his photos close up on the Learning Portal.
Great, thank you. So, like I say, our next example, we're moving as I said, albums kind of change their shape and form depending on the photographs that they're meant to be housing. So after albumin photographs, silver gelatin black and white photographs become the norm, and silver gelatin photography is still used today. It's very stable. If you took darkroom photography in high school or anything like that, you probably did silver gelatin. So this is one such album. And this is another shape that is quite common. So you can see instead of a binding where they're sewing on the edge of the spine, instead we have across the front 2 holes where a rope has been inserted and is tied around the side there. Generally, we would call that a stab sewn binding. It's not really sewn because there's really only one stitch, but that's the same general name for this type. It's quite a common thing in a lot of Asian binding conditions. And the advantage to these types of albums commercially was that you could untie the rope here, slide the front cover off, and add more pages, decrease pages, so you could make it as thick or as thin as you wanted it to be. And I open it up. I'm sure this is probably very familiar to a lot of people. These kind of black, almost construction paper looking like pages with black lick and stick photo corners with black and white photos held in. I think these are probably some of the most common types of albums that you tend to see. I know my grandparents definitely have a lot of these types of albums. You often have white pencil crayon or white inks used to denote people, places, and that sort of thing. These tend to be quite stable in my experience. The paper is of reasonable quality. As I said, the photo corners are usually the lick and stick variety, which means it's usually like a gum adhesive, and those tend to age pretty well. They don't tend to become overly acidic. They don't tend to cause many problems. So these are often quite nice to come across because I usually know they'll be reasonably stable. The only thing that can happen is as you shift pages around, sometimes the paper is more limp, and so it causes some creasing, some bending in the photographs themselves, and photographs don't always like to bend that way. And also because, as you're kind of seeing me use sliding here, you've got a hinge across the front, and that, again, tends to get overused and can sometimes become detached. But again, I would say the same thing. You can definitely contact a conservator to see about having these things put together totally, completely in the proper way, or you can make a box, wrap it up nice, and just leave it as it is.
So if those photo corners are loose or they've come off, it's probably best just to leave them as it is, or as you said, contact a conservator for advice?
Yeah, I start with that for sure. I would avoid using tapes is my number one thing. When I'm in the lab here, there are adhesives that I have that I often just tap down. Those adhesives are usually a wheat starch paste, which is basically just a high quality flour cooked with water for about 20 minutes. It's an adhesive that has been used since ancient Egypt. So we have seen from experience that it lasts. It's a very functional, long-lasting adhesive that also doesn't become acidic over time. So it's one of the mainstays of a paper conservation studio. There are also some variations on PVA glue that are reasonably stable that can sometimes be used for these purposes too. But of course, whenever you're applying an adhesive like that, like wheat starch paste, for instance, is a water-based adhesive. Applying too much could lead too much moisture in the book. The gelatin layers that are on top of photographs that hold the images are also water soluble, so you've got to be really careful about how and under what circumstances you apply these things. So if you want, I mean, if things belong to you and you want to give it a try, that's totally fine. But I just warn you that there are possible ways that could go sideways. So it's always a good idea to contact a professional.
So you mentioned wheat starch paste and PVA glue. Are both of those things things that are relatively available?
Like a PVA glue is like craft glue, spool glue. The glues that I would use in the lab here are modifications on that would make it a little bit more stable. When you buy craft store variety, we're just not always sure what the additives are in there. So when I buy materials for the conservation lab, I'm usually buying, if I can, non-proprietary objects. So I usually mix up a lot of my own adhesives here so that I know exactly what went into them, so I know how they will age. Or I try to buy from archival supply chain. One of the most frequently used ones that's Canadian-based here is Carmaclean. And you can buy with starch paste and archival versions of PVA glue, usually jade 403 is the conservation grade PVA glue. You can buy that from them. And whenever you're buying materials for long-term storage, you're looking for archival options. There are a few different things you can look for. So there are ANSI and ISO standards for preservation. So in the description, if it mentions that it has met an ISO standard for preservation, it's usually a good indication. There's also the photographic.
Is that ISO?
ISO, yes. ISO or ANSI, ANSI and ISO. And there's also the photographic activity test, or the PAT. So if you see that material is PAT tested and approved, that's also an indication that you're using high quality, good quality material. Most items on an archival supply shop should have at least one of those things in the description. So I've got one more example of the similar silver gelatin style photographic albums. And so this is another example of housing as well. So we have our 4-flap folder. We use that a lot. If you have something that is a little bit more fragile or you think just needs a little bit more support, we also have these are Hollinger metal edge boxes. They are also available from Carmaclean. And what's great about these boxes is that the cardstock that they're made of is a high quality cellulose material. But also the edges are reinforced with these metal brackets that are going on the outside. And that alleviates the need to, or negates the need to use any adhesives. So adhesives are usually the materials that tend to become acidic. They can off-gas acidic vapors that negatively affect materials within the case. So that's avoiding adhesives is a plus in these boxes. Also, when we're storing things at the archives, we have a huge collection and we have a small number of people that are maintaining that collection. So we want to be able to package things up in such a way that we won't have to repackage them within our career. You know, it's going to last at least, you know, a good several decades before it needs any more attention. So a Hollinger box with some ethifoam inside to customize to the exact size of the album. That's an option too. And then the album itself is wrapped in an acid-free tissue. If you aren't interested in investing the time and money that goes into some of these different box systems, if nothing else, if you invest in a little bit of acid-free tissue, I would say that's probably a pretty good one. A pretty good place to start. This is the material that's in direct contact with your album. And even if you are putting your album into a box that maybe is made of slightly lower quality materials, if those materials are a little bit acidic, they're going to come in direct contact with the tissue before they come in direct contact with the album. And that tissue will help to, it's white, so it'll show you if it's becoming yellow. That probably means it's absorbing something nasty. And it's a bit of a sacrificial layer or a barrier layer. It's a nice thing to invest in. If you are looking to do that, there are usually two options. Again, you can also get acid-free tissue on Carmaclean or other archival suppliers. There's usually two different options, buffered and unbuffered. And what that refers to is basically the pH of the material. So tissue that is buffered has what's called an alkaline reserve in the pulp, in the paper. And what that does is it's an alkaline or a basic material, so that as the album or whatever else you're storing, as it ages, it will become acidic, a little bit acidic. Most things become a little bit acidic as they age. Some things become very acidic as they age. So the alkaline reserve in the tissue will absorb some of that acidic byproduct and react with it to neutralize it. So it's a very good thing in certain circumstances. However, the alkaline reserve in that tissue elevates the whole pH of this tissue. And some photographic processes don't do well in alkaline environments. So we generally, when we're talking photographic material, you want to keep the pH neutral. So you want to select unbuffered for photographic material.
Just to make sure, unbuffered acid-free tissue is the best choice for photographic material?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
And
if you have scrapbooks with newsprint, that might be an occasion where you want to go with the buffered, but anything that has photographs, acid-free, unbuffered is your best choice.
thank you.
So this is just another example of similar photographs on the black paper. This one has been, it looks like, used and repurposed a little bit. There's some inks that have been rubbed out. And there are also, just saw one, instances where photographs have fallen out. And for our purposes, we don't know exactly which spot they go back to, so we don't want to tap them down or adhere them down in the wrong spot. So what we've done is encapsulated them with notes on the envelope that tell us where in the book, roughly it belongs to this open page, but we don't know exactly where on this page. And again, this is an unbuffered, acid-free envelope, and we're just resting it in place here so that we know it's associated, we know where it comes from, but it's safe. If you have albums where maybe one photograph is not looking very good, and especially when the book closes, if it's showing, you're getting kind of like a halo of also fading or the colors are changing or anything, something's come into contact with something else that is causing a negative reaction. Sometimes being able to encapsulate that one object that is not behaving so nicely with everything else is a way of keeping everything together and keeping that object in its original context, but kind of blocking out the interactions that are not being advantageous. And we do that quite a bit here because, as I said, I think photo albums are more than the sum of their parts, right? It's not just about each individual photograph, it's about where it is in the whole and the kind of the story that it tells as you flip through each project, or each page rather. So you don't want to lose that original order, you don't want to lose those original contexts, and especially if there are notes and identifications in the text on the page, you don't want to lose those either.
Yeah, that context is what makes the photo album so important, is knowing who's who and when it was taken and all of those.
Exactly. So definitely don't want to lose any of that. So silver gelatin photographs are used, as I said, right up until today. Of course, as early as the 40s, actually, color photography was becoming more and more of a thing. And by the 60s and 70s, we see a lot of colored photographs. And we also see the emergence of what I'm sure is very familiar to everyone, what we call magnetic albums. Well, actually, this is an early example that has mostly black and white images. But magnetic albums are these ones that have adhesive on the back of the page and a plastic layer that peels back and then sticks back down. I'm sure I at least have vivid memories of that sound, that sound that it makes when you peel it back. These albums, again, are so iconic, but they're terrible in terms of long-term preservation, unfortunately. For the same reasons as what we were discussing with tape. One of two things happens with the adhesive. It either fails, as what's happened in these, so the plastic is loose, the photographs are loose, the adhesive is completely gone, it's just a bit of staining on the page behind the photograph, and thankfully it hasn't leached out onto the photograph very much at all. So it's self-destructing a little bit, but self-destructing inwards and not affecting a lot of other things. That's kind of a nice, rare occasion. The other side of that is everything cements down and it is impossible to remove them. And any attempt to remove them, I wouldn't recommend that because you will inevitably end up skinning photographs and breaking them off. It's very difficult thing to do. Because these things are so unstable and because they often have color photographs in them, at the archives here, usually what I recommend is that we digitize them for access so that we have an image of each page. And again, we know how each page flows, we can see everything in context. But ideally, color photographs and these kind of unstable adhesives, we like to store them in frozen storage, actually, because that the low, really extremely low temperatures mean that chemical reactions happen at a much, much slower rate. And most photographic or color photographic processes, most common ones are chromogenic, and these tend to fade even in the dark. They will fade in the light a lot, but they will fade a little bit in the dark. So if they're self-destructing, kind of no matter what we do in room temperature, maybe to a really cold temperature, means that reaction happens a lot slower. That said, I do not recommend you put any photograph albums in your freezer. When we do that here at the archives, we do that under very controlled circumstances, and our freezers are kept in very specific environments. Basically, we are trying to keep the relative humidity in those freezers at a much lower rate than what is common in a regular kitchen freezer. So it's two quite different things. But that being said, keeping your photo albums in the kind of living space of the house, for example, avoiding basements and attics where you have really extreme changes in temperature and relative humidity, especially in the summer when things get really hot. That just speeds up a lot of deterioration mechanisms, especially in sci-fi and poor quality images and color photographs. They just change a lot. So avoiding heat is a good thing. Don't put anything in the freezer.
So Lauren, we are just about out of time. And
that happened quickly.
It goes pretty fast. So this adhesive sticky film pages, is it best just to, you're saying just leave them now rather than trying to pull them off?
That's a tricky one. So for your personal albums at home, if you feel that the original Flower Power album here is not integral to what you feel is valuable in that album, maybe transferring those photographs into a more stable photographic album and keeping any inscriptions in that, maybe that's worthwhile for you. Again, the way we do things in the archives is a little bit different. We try to keep as much of the original material together as we can because we have the luxury of resources like frozen storage and stuff, so we can accommodate those things in a way that you can't always necessarily do at home. But conservation is all about finding the best course of action to keep things as long as possible in a way that still preserves the value. And when it comes to your family photographs, you're the one determining the value. So if having that album is an integral part of that value, then yeah, leave it. Maybe you want to photograph it so that you have something to remember it as it slowly decomposes. But if it's not an integral part of the value, if the individual photographs are more important to you, then maybe transferring them to a different, a newer album is worthwhile.
Thank you, Lauren. So I have some key takeaways for my own project. Get those photos out of the basement.
Yes.
Get some unbuffered tissue to maybe wrap the albums or pages in, and tape is evil.
Tape is evil, yes, my key takeaway.
And a few times, and for bigger projects, you mentioned contacting a conservator. What is the best way to contact a conservator or find out who's available for contracts and things like those?
So the best course of action there is to consult the Canadian Association for Professional Conservators, CAPC, and perhaps I can send you a link to that, Kim, so you can make that public. They're a central body within Canada. They accredit conservators, so they put them through an interview to make sure that they have the requisite training and the ability to make the ethical decisions that are in line with those generally agreed upon in our profession. And the CAPC website has a great page on how to select a conservator that's right for you and what you have the right to expect. So that's very advantageous. And they also have contact details for accredited conservators and search functions. So you can search based on media, based on location, that sort of thing.
Thank you. So the Canadian Association for Professional Conservators, we've popped a web address into the chat box for people to follow up on, and we'll see if we can get one in the description. Lauren, thank you so much for preparing all of these resources for us to look at and for sharing your expertise today. It's so helpful, and it's going to make our projects better.
I hope so.
So I want to thank everyone for joining us. The Royal BC Museum has reopened and we are ready to welcome you back. You can find out more on our website about timed tickets and what's changed. So please have a visit the website before you come by. We will be continuing our at-home kids, and at outside for the foreseeable future. And links for those programs will be posted on the museum's website as well. I'm going to be back on Tuesday with your colleague, Lauren, textile conservator Colleen Wilson, and she's going to talk about best practices for washing your textiles at home. So I hope you'll join us for that, and thank you, everyone. We'll end the recording.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we're stopping Facebook. There we go.